Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with David Greenberg, a noted history professor at Rutgers. David, good to see you.
Good to
We're
see you
talking about
too.
shutdown. So we're, you know, as we stand sort of on the precipice of another shutdown, we do have history to guide us. So talk a little bit about what we're likely to face based on, I guess we've had Clinton, Obama, Trump. I mean, there's been multiple times in history where this has happened. Maybe a good place to start is to remind people why we have these shutdowns in the first place, the idiosyncrasies that got us to this in the position.
Right. Well, they always happen when we have divided government, which is to say, when one party controls the White House and the other party, one or both houses of Congress, usually the House of Representatives, because that tends to be kind of the less agreeable body. Senators tend to be more about compromise, and the House is usually where you find the more extreme members of either party, really, but who can often make demands on their own party leadership, which is, of course, what's happening now. So, yeah, in recent decades, it's happened a lot over budget issues. As people know, we've had a terrible problem with budget deficits and the national debt for a long time, really since the Reagan years. It did come down significantly in the Clinton years, where we're starting to get surpluses, and we've made progress on other occasions. But usually, that's kind of the reason. There's a lot at stake in these budget bills, and both parties have a lot to win or lose.
Can we just talk first of all, like how, like basically the U.S. is this, it's a unique beast in many respects with regard to other countries don't have this kind of game of chicken with regard to government operations. So what was the incentive to be putting such a, in some ways, draconian measure in place where if we don't reach an agreement, government shuts down?
Well, other countries often don't have this because in a parliamentary system, the prime minister automatically comes from the party with the majority in parliament, right?
Right.
And we elect our Congress and our senators separate from electing the president, so you can wind up with divided government. Um, it's always been the case that we've needed both the Congress and the president to sign off on any piece of legislation. Of course, that's the whole idea of separation of powers.
Mm-hmm.
But passing an annual budget is part of the legislative process. And so if you don't have a budget for the coming year, um, it, we have to go to a system where we're paying only for those things that are deemed necessary, and that cuts out a lot. Um, Now, my own view is that both sides often have a stake in a certain degree of alarmism. Um, the truth is, the country does function okay with short term shutdowns. Government workers don't like it because they're furloughed, they're not getting
Mm-hmm.
paid. People who have jobs or lives that are directly tied into government activity may feel the brunt of it. But for most Americans, it is the kind of thing you can live with for a short while. At a certain point, it would start cutting into really valuable services.
What is the longest shutdown that we've had to endure to date?
Well, I believe it was the one under Donald Trump. People may remember there was this big fight over funding for the wall that he wanted to build on the Mexican border. And this happened after the Democrats had taken control of Congress. So he did not have a friendly House of Representatives to work with. And the Democrats simply did not want to give him the money for the wall. And so the government shut down. I think in a weird way, because there was so much daily chaos and surprise and nonsense and theatricality during the Trump presidency. it almost gets forgotten as just one of many, many things that people rolled their eyes over. And of course, Trump ended up not really getting much out of that. Um, it's an interesting case because usually in the past, certainly with the Bill Clinton shutdown, which was kind of the most dramatic, then again under Obama, people tended to blame the Republicans in the House.
Hmm.
In Trump's case, they also they blame Trump more than they blame the Democrats. So I don't think it's a partisan bias, but the Republicans have bad luck with these shutdowns. When they're in Congress, they tend to get blamed. And the one time it's happened under a Republican president, at least for any significant length, he too bore the brunt of the blame from the American people.
You've said that the impact has been fairly innocuous. What impact, besides obviously people not getting paid, furloughed, federal government workers, national parks? I mean, what
Right.
is there a point at which it does become a huge problem? I mean, we've not seen any consequences yet that you think have given people concern over this?
Right. I mean, things like Social Security continue to get paid. The things that people's livelihoods depend on. But the post office still runs. But things like national parks do shut down, and certainly over time, as money is spent down, I think if a shutdown went on for 2 months, you would certainly start seeing that, and they would need to cut into services that are, for the time being, deemed necessary. But that, hasn't happened. And I think, again, there's an incentive for politicians to use dire rhetoric as a way of sort of putting pressure on the opposition to come to the table, to negotiate, to come to an agreement. But there's lots of ways that presidents, the executive branch, can move monies around, defer certain things. There can be a long-term consequence. I mean, all that diminished government activity does, in a small
Impact
way,
the GDP.
on the economy. I mean,
Yeah.
government activity is a sizable part of our economy. So it's nothing to be dismissive of. What I'm just saying is we tend to often be alarmist because that's how the political game.
It's not
is played.
apocalyptic. You mentioned that the shutdown under Bill Clinton was the most dramatic during the 90s. In what respect? Remind us of how it was dramatic.
Well, it was dramatic because this was the first time in 40 years that the Republicans had taken control of the House of Representatives. And, now we've had it seesaw a lot in the last 20, 30 years. But at the time, people almost couldn't imagine what that was going to be like. And then on top of that, to have this bomb-throwing provocateur in Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House, people really felt this is a kind of seismic change coming to Washington. And back then, the Republicans' main beef with the Democrats was spending on Medicare and Medicaid, and to a lesser extent, Social Security. But after years of running up huge deficits under Republican presidents, it should be noted, Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., the Republicans had made something of a fetish of cutting the budget. And of course, Medicare is a huge, huge budget item. So that's kind of where they wanted to look to cut. Clinton put his line in the sand at sort of defending Medicare. And that was sort of the main bone of contention. And in a way, it was sort of a referendum of whether the American public was really all in on the so-called Gingrich revolution, whether people wanted to go as far as the Republicans wanted. And Gingrich and the Republicans really believed they did. They believed that their victory in the 1994 midterm elections meant this fundamental change in the way Americans were thinking. And Clinton was wagering no, that Gingrich is going to come off as the extremist, as the petulant one, as the uncooperative one. And he, of course, ended up winning
Yeah.
that bet, and it redounded to Clinton's benefit.
Do you think that the Obama, I feel like we should complete the circle here before looking ahead, was there any symbolic importance to that particular shutdown? I think in many ways it also does get forgotten. It's almost maybe like trauma, where we like to forget this has happened in the past.
Right. I think, Obama probably came out of that one ahead too. Again, healthcare and the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was a central contention in that shutdown and how it was going to be implemented and money spent. Part of the problem there was Obama didn't quite have the communicative skills. I mean, it's funny because we remember him as this inspiring candidate, but as president, he didn't quite have the same ability to sort of connect with people and say, this is what we're fighting for when it comes to something like healthcare expenditure. And so I think with that one, there was sort of just a generalized eye rolling and people looking at Washington as dysfunctional. Although, the polling, as I recall, did sort of tip in Obama's favor. Again, it was a somewhat similar situation where you had a Republican Party in the House that was moving increasingly in a radical direction against a president who was trying to hold down sort of what he thought of as the center or the center left.
And what about today? I mean, let's look forward. I mean, so would history suggest we should perhaps be a bit more sanguine or easygoing about what is, potentially before us at this point in terms of the stakes and the consequences?
I mean, I am pretty confident this will get resolved. What's interesting to me and what makes this one just very different, in each of those cases, of course, the House Speaker had to pay attention to his or her caucus, and there were extremists, people who were making absolutist or difficult demands. But really, this is mainly a fight between Kevin McCarthy and his caucus. It's really not that much a fight. If it were kind of up to Kevin McCarthy, he probably could come to agreement with Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer pretty quickly, I think. And to me, the question has been why McCarthy just doesn't pursue the entirely different strategy, which Republicans have not been willing to do in a very long time, which is you work with the Democrats. That if you have 7 or 20 members of your own caucus who are just being this difficult, forget them, cut a deal with Hakeem Jeffries in the House, with Schumer, and say, I'm going to govern in a fundamentally different way, in a bipartisan way, where I'm going to get, 2/3 of my caucus and half of their caucus, and we'll get majorities that way. But, that's been anathema in our partisan environment, and I think he's sort of afraid to go there.
Anything else in terms of what you would be looking for, what's on your radar as we head into this? It is, in some ways, we haven't become inured to it, but it comes up so often that it's hard to hit the panic button every time this is threatened, because it does seem to often be a threat, the government shutdown.
Right. I mean, I think in a way, the Democrats are going to take the position of stand back while your opponent is destroying himself. And that for a while, at least, just the way they did during McCarthy's attempt to get elected speaker with ballot after ballot, and they refused to help him out. I think they're going to sort of wait till the wick burns pretty close before stepping in. And I think at some point either a few of these Republicans will come around, or McCarthy will have to find a different strategy.
One last question, David, if you don't mind, because we are in election season, which we often are in election season, has it made any difference or had an impact on the presidential elections, these shutdowns, and how Americans perceive they were handled?
Well, I'm trying to think. I think, the Obama one, if I recall, was sort of just after an election, and it probably didn't matter there. And I believe the same with Trump. So you could look at Bill Clinton and look at his 1996 reelection, which, maybe it wasn't technically a landslide, but it was pretty close and sort of a surprise given how much trouble Clinton seemed to be in politically around 1994. Right. And so in that case, I do think that Gingrich, sort of the overall behavior of Gingrich and the House Republicans, including how they were in the shutdown, certainly played into the Democrats' hands. I mean, there were other things obviously in Clinton's favor, including a rebounding economy, declining crime, improved social and economic metrics in almost every category, that people felt finally were out of what had been sort of since the early 70s, these doldrums. So I think Clinton had a lot going for him in 96, but probably that shutdown at least helped him a little bit.
Well, politicians be warned, I suppose, and certainly the economy is going to be one of the biggest issues in this election. David, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to when we speak again.
Thanks for having me on. Good talking with you.